This is Cher, and I'm here with Jason and Rob. Guys, if you had to describe this podcast in 5 words or less, what would you say?
I'm going to go with Wile E. Coyote guzzling gasoline.
I'm thinking climate change, diarrhea, hurricane.
Are you serious? Maybe I should do this thing on my own.
Fine. It's a show about how to stay sane in a world where there's too many people consuming too much stuff and the planet can't take it anymore.
You had me at diarrhea.
Caution, if you're allergic to 4-letter words, you might want to try a different podcast.
Just a heads up before we get into the show today, this episode and our other episodes have a lot of references. If you want to find those, just go to postcarbon.org/crazytown and click on episode notes. Cher, how are you doing, man? I'm.
Why do you ask?
Well, on like a Facebook post came out. You were just dissing on economists. Are you okay? You're mad about something?
Yeah, you mean the one where I said they were the most dangerous people in the world?
Right. That's beyond serial killers and whatever.
Well, I didn't say that, but
yeah,
I'm a little pissed at economists these days.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, economists are pretty easy to get pissed at. It's like they forget that the environment actually has an effect on the economy.
And the economy has an effect on the environment. I mean,
it's just an input. I mean, the environment is just a place to get stuff that we can use to produce things.
Mostly unlimited stuff.
And then just dump our pollution into it.
Well, when I was thinking about the problems that we have with economists, it reminded me of something that happened way back, like kindergarten.
In the 80s or earlier than that?
That was
probably even earlier than that.
70s.
I mean,
wow.
This is getting bad. One thing, I have a really long-term memory. Like most people don't remember anything about their childhood, it seems, but I do. So anyway, I wanted to share with you guys.
Let's do this. Let's share.
This story of the Three Musketeers. Okay?
That's from before when you were a kid. That's Alexandre Dumas.
Wow. You even used the French accent there. That's
Incroyable.
impressive.
I'm a one of those
I thought it was
West Coast.
I thought his name was Dumbass, but
right.
No, so the Three Musketeers, it's almost like the three of us. It was me and my two best buddies. People used to call us that. And we used to play games all the time, sports, whatever, stickball in the street, which, based on our car culture episode,
Dangerous.
You can't do that anymore.
Yeah,
but
it's not illegal.
But we would get together all the time and play these games. And one of the Three Musketeers, his name was Scott. He was probably, I guess I'd call him a bit more competitive than the other two of us. And he actually went on to have he walked on the soccer team at the University of North Carolina when he got to college. So pretty good athlete and really competitive. And what used to happen is he would quit when he would start losing in a game. We'd be playing a game, he'd fall behind and be like, I quit, and he'd go home.
Oh, that's childish.
Yeah, I know.
He was
what
a child.
Stupid, childish child, yeah. And so me and the other musketeer, David, we were getting pretty upset by this. So anyway, me and David were like, what are we going to do with this guy? And we decided, all right, that's it. If he quits another time, we're banning him. So we go to play a game, and he falls behind and quits, which is amazing because he was the best athlete of us. But anyway, actually, now that I think about it, David was like a college gymnast. I was the sucky athlete. I didn't do anything in college. Anyway, that's another story. But so Scott quits, and we're like, all right, that's it. We're not playing with you for a week. And
man.
it was a
At that age, a week is like a lifetime.
It's
huge punishment, and he got really upset, maybe rightfully so. And he went home and he complained to his dad. He's like, "Those guys aren't letting me play anymore." And his dad came to talk with us, and we told him what happened, and he was like, "Yeah, that seems about right. That seems like a fair point. Good work, you guys."
Oh, that's a good parent.
Yeah. Yeah, and so Scott did his time for that week.
Oh, you guys stuck with it?
Yeah, we stayed with it.
Wow.
And then after the week, everything was back. He learned how to deal with the game not going his way, or at least put aside some of the emotion, and was able to play. And we all had a better time going forward. And what I realized from this is we gave him a very direct feedback. If you're going to act this way, this is what's going to happen. And
consequences.
Yeah. And we even had enforcement from above, right? Scott's dad
Authority.
sort of like, coming in and backing us up on that decision. And this is where the economists are completely lacking. They don't have any sort of feedback in their models. And so when an economist says something outrageous, it's because they don't understand what's feeding into whatever it is they're spewing.
Well,
oh my gosh.
I guess I would say they don't have feedback from outside of their own little system, right? Because I think economists get rewarded for whatever theories or tinkering that they might do on a policy level if they see a direct impact within the economic system, right?
Right.
Jobs grew, unemployment went down, the GDP went up, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But they're not getting feedback from outside that system. They only care about those specific things.
That's right. But I think that's what's weird is even little kids can get that, oh, this thing affects that thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But economists seem to have this crazy blind spot about it.
Let me tell you about this is so true, and I've got a story. I was a little older than you. I wasn't 5 or 6 or whatever it was.
You were 11?
I was like 30, 31
Oh,
or something like that.
ancient.
I think this is around 2002. I had this research group that I had put together, and we were people from around the U.S. We had someone from Japan. We had people from UK and Europe. We had some people from South America.
It's very worldly.
It was very worldly. And we were looking at the relationship between global climate change and biodiverse ecosystems in the Andes, specifically Manu National Park in Peru. Unbelievable place. I got to go there a number of times for this research. But I kind of helped found this group, and so I was trying to figure out how we could integrate the different research threads in the study site.
So the idea is climate change is affecting the ecosystem, the habitats in this place?
Yes. We were like interested in how sort of, the birds and the trees would move upslope as the climate warmed, let's say.
Okay.
But this all, of course, ties into the socioeconomic system. So what's happening to how much carbon we're emitting because we're burning fuels. And so, to pull this all together, I started to read the literature on what's called the integrated assessment models, which the ultimate for this is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC.
That's the big international climate body, right?
So I'm trying to learn, how do these integrated assessment models work? Because we're kind of doing a miniature version of this in this national park in Peru, and I wanted to kind of just have a bigger picture. I was a narrow kind of biology PhD guy, and I wanted to study this, and I wanted to understand how to pull these threads together. So I read an IPCC report. I just started, I'm going to read this. And
that's a pretty insane thing to do.
Yeah, you're you and 12 other people have done that.
Not exactly.
An entire report.
Yeah. And what was interesting was that I got very disturbed by it. Now you think, oh, you got disturbed because it presented a very bleak portrait of the future. True.
But you already probably knew that.
Yeah.
The pessimist that you are.
Yeah, no, it wasn't just that. It was that it didn't add up. It made absolutely no sense. I'm reading this report from this body that is renowned in this world, the world of scientific community comes together and produces these things.
Yeah, they won the Nobel Prize in science, right?
Yeah, and I'm going, I don't get this.
What didn't you get?
Oh man, this is well, okay.
Jason's having a little traumatic flashback here. Yeah.
Well, it was weird. It kind of evolves. You're reading this and you just get this disturbing to you psychologically, right? It's a mix.
There's a disturbance in the force.
Exactly. It was kind of like that. It was kind of like Darth Vader's voice, like, oh, there's something wrong here.
I don't think that was how Darth Vader talked.
Disturbance you feel.
That's better.
That's not Darth Vader either.
Well, so here's what it reads like. It reads like a mix of Armageddon and Wall-E, the movie Wall-E. Remember that movie where
Yeah, we've discussed that before.
Yeah, it's like you're on a cruise ship and you're just guzzling
space,
and you're just all your gadgets. So how do I explain this? Let me give you a quote. from the latest report, which is similar to what the older reports were like. All right. But
Just
before
more dire.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're basically trying to make us, all of us, as disturbed as you are. That's the point. Okay, yeah, go lay it on us. Let's hear this quote.
Well, first I want to give you some terminology so you understand it. So I'm going to use there's shorthands. Like RCP stands for Representative Concentration Pathways, and
Real crappy poop.
Right.
RCP.
That's a little redundant there.
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
What it's tied to are these SSPs, or shared socioeconomic pathways. So basically it's this vision of the future. It's saying, here's how we're going to develop our economy and our society throughout the 21st century.
They're basically scenarios of assumptions that they're making, right?
Yeah. Here's what the world looks like over the next several decades.
Right.
And then what's tied to that is how many emissions of carbon, go into the air because of how much fuel we're burning, right?
All right.
Okay. And so they're numbered, there's 2.6, 4.5, 6, 8.5, and these have to do with how much additional watts per meter squared of heat is trapped onto the Earth.
Okay, so if you have a socioeconomic pathway that's assuming we're gonna do a lot more stuff in society, that means you're gonna burn more fuel and you're gonna trap more heat, more watts per square meter.
Yeah,
am I getting this right?
Yeah, and there's a mix of, say, okay, we do this with coal, or we do this more with nuclear, or we have more renewables. They have different ways in which the energy mix evolves. Okay. And the other thing to know is that when the IPCC writers write something, they often put in parentheses if they're really confident about something, or if they're sort of like low confidence or high confidence. So this is the mix. The quote will have this kind of terms into it, right?
Well, this is with all these acronyms, people like me can't follow very well.
It's not easy to read these reports, as you can tell.
Which is why only 12 people have done it.
Yeah, only 12 people. Okay, here we go. Ready for this?
Okay, let's lay it on us.
Throughout the 21st century, climate change is expected to lead to increases in ill health in many regions, and especially in developing countries with low income, as compared to a baseline without climate change. High confidence. Health impacts include greater likelihood of injury and death due to more intense heat waves and fires.
High confidence.
Increased risks from foodborne and waterborne diseases, and a loss of work capacity and reduced labor productivity in vulnerable populations. High confidence. It keeps going. Risks of undernutrition in poor regions will increase. High confidence.
Yeah, this is our laugh so you don't cry moment.
Exactly.
Because, geez,
Yeah.
It keeps going. We are confident that we are fucked.
Well, this is just one paragraph. This goes on. Risks from vector-borne diseases are projected to generally increase with warming due to the extension of the infection area and season, despite reductions in some areas that become too hot for disease vectors. Medium confidence. The mosquitoes die.
Yeah, the mosquitoes all, they actually explode. They pop like popcorn.
Yeah, okay.
We'd have a lot more disease, except the mosquitoes can't even survive
Exactly.
this heat.
That's a new product. Orville Redenbacher's selling mosquito pop.
Okay. Here it goes on. This is just one paragraph.
Make it stop, please.
Globally, the magnitude and severity of negative impacts will increasingly outweigh positive impacts. High confidence. Sorry.
High confidence.
Yeah. By 2100, for RCP 8.5.
That's basically the warmest scenario they have.
Yeah.
Wait, so that means, is 8.5 meaning, that's not degrees warming?
No, that's the additional watts per meter squared
yeah,
added.
thank you.
Right. Yeah.
But it's not quite 8.5 degrees Celsius warming, but it's
5
really
or
high.
6
It's up
or
there.
something.
Yeah, it's like 5 or 6. The combination of high temperature and humidity in some areas for parts of the year is expected to compromise common human activities, including growing food and working outdoors. High confidence.
Breathing.
Exactly. So the language you have to go through on this, right? They're making it so...
Okay, it's dire.
It's dire.
But what does this have to do with...
Okay, it sounds
with
bad.
economics?
It sounds really bad. And I'm really worried, right? But then I'm confused because all this entire report, everything is a world that's wealthier. So if you read back further earlier chapters, the scenario being played out here is that this is a world in which there's much more consumption. There's much more food available. There's much more consumer goods available. There's much better housing stock available. There's much better healthcare available. everything is wonderful. In other words, it's like I said, it's like we're all driving to the shopping mall and having a great life, and then later chapters it reads like this.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
No feedback.
There's no feedback. There's no freaking feedback. And I'm this young researcher. I'm like 31 or something, or 32 at the time. And so I'm kind of new in academia, recent PhD grad, and I'm going outside of my normal area of expertise.
Yeah.
And I've got this friend at UC Davis where I was, and I have lunch with him. This guy he was a Dartmouth grad and then a Harvard grad, and a smart guy, Cam. And I confess my confusion. I'm like, what's going on? I kind of explained what I just said. Is there something wrong with my understanding here? The climate change impacts sound just terrible, but apparently the economy just keeps humming along. It doesn't make any sense.
It's got to be like antiperspirant sales, right? From all the extra sweat.
Yeah. And Cam, what was fascinating was that this was the perfect friend to have at that time. Guess who Cam knew really well and personally?
Yoda.
Almost. Donella Meadows.
Oh, really?
I'm not kidding.
Well, okay, so for folks listening, who's Donella Meadows?
Well, she was one of the original authors of the Limits to Growth study, and she was a professor at Dartmouth at the time that Cam was an undergrad, and he actually lived in this big farmhouse that she had, and so she had students living at her house, and they would all have dinner together and talk about stuff.
Mm-hmm. And she's become very well known. She's since passed away, but very well known for her work around systems thinking, specifically.
Yeah, exactly.
Incredible writer, too. Did you ever see her series of articles? I think it was called The Global Citizen.
Yeah, I mean, amazing.
Yeah.
And so here I happen to have this friend who lived with Donella Meadows, and I'm like coming to him going, is there something wrong with me? And he goes, no.
Yes, and...
He goes, oh, geez. And he starts saying, Jason, have you ever read Limits to Growth? No. Do you know who Herman Daly is? No. And he just starts listing all this literature. And he goes, oh.
Sorry, you're about to be thrown down the rabbit hole. We're
You made the
renaming you
mistake-
Alice.
You made the mistake of asking a question.
So that was sort of my introduction to this, but it came from this tension, this unresolved tension between reading this giant report and being this young scientist and going, how can I question this? And so I kind of, to summarize, I had three big problems. There was no feedbacks that linked the climate change damage to the socioeconomic progress that the narratives and of these economic models assumed. And then they all assumed there were unlimited resources, that we could just keep expanding the human enterprise. And then there was no alternative narrative that said, what if we used less and tried to live appropriately to prevent all this damage?
What kind of sacrilege are you pumping out here?
Yeah.
Live with
Well,
less.
I think that from my understanding of sort of the process of developing these models, like the RCPs, right? These are climate models and looking at the impacts of warming at different levels. And there's a lot of feedback in those models, within the climate system. But where there's this kind of line drawn is saying that all this stuff about the socio-economic system, we don't know. That's not our bailiwick. That's right. Some other territory of expertise. We just have to defer there. So they operate by basically taking these SSPs, right? At face value. And the SSPs are kind of made up by economists, right?
Yeah, at this point, that's right.
And those economists have this vision in their mind that there's going to continue to be economic growth, energy demand growth, material progress, all these things that are going to continue to go on, in fact, must go on, right? Yeah. And so these climate scientists are sort of saying, well, okay, what's the impact of these things, on the climate system if we do that? But never questioning, well, shit, if the climate changes, significantly, you were just talking about, reading in that quote, Well, some labor is actually gonna be hard to do, right? Like,
Right. There's some
going outside, maybe not a good idea.
Growing food, I believe
Yeah.
you mentioned.
Oh yeah,
as-
there's giant floods. There's increase in disease. There's the crashing of agricultural production. It just increase in landslides.
So there's no feedback coming back.
Right. That all has costs.
And that gets to what I think you were saying, Rob, and that is that within the field of economics, it seems like there's not an openness or an inquiry to trying to get feedback, from outside of the economic system to sort of understand.
Very, very stuck in this one
Right.
worldview of growing the economy.
And it's interesting because it makes me think of William Nordhaus, right? So William Nordhaus, yeah. So you know who I'm talking about. For folks listening who don't, William Nordhaus recently actually received the Nobel Prize in economics, right? The most esteemed prize you can win as an economist.
He's from this little college. What's it called again?
It's Yale.
Yale. Okay. Yeah.
Or as Dumas over here pronounces it, Yale.
Yale. Exactly. So Nordhaus, he just won this prize, and in fact, when he won that prize it coincided with actually around the time of the release of this big landmark report by the IPCC warning about the fact that we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, slash them. They
Super
were saying
fast, yeah.
50%.
Yeah,
right?
45%, by 2030, and basically virtually 100% by
Which,
2050.
can we just hold for a second? Because 2030 sounds like a long ways off, but 11 years.
No, it's not very far.
To use half, or 45.
Yeah. So
That's crazy.
These two things happen at the same time, right? They're warning, and I think that there's been a lot of criticism to the IPCC for actually soft pedaling a little bit the true nature of the climate crisis. It's partly because it's an international body that has representation of climate scientists from every country, right?
Yeah.
So you got Saudi climate scientists.
So
on
like
there,
the Saudi guys are like, we got all kind of time. The Vanuatu guys are like, can we get this show on the road here?
The Vanuatu climate science.
Well, they're underwater right now, so
just sounds
they're
like a
not. They're not at the meetings.
They've
No,
got-
they have
got
some big
snorkel.
volcanoes. They have some big volcanoes there.
They don't have snorkels. They can't speak through those.
So it's what a juxtaposition, because Nordhaus, you'd say, oh, it's amazing. Climate is actually being recognized within the field of economics because Nordhaus wins this esteemed prize for his work on climate.
That's what he won for, right? For trying to look at the economics of climate change, right?
But here's the problem with this. He's worked on basically looking at putting a price on carbon. But his whole work has been around going slow on that.
Yeah.
Basically saying, hey, we can live with a certain amount of warming as long as it doesn't compromise economic growth, right?
Right.
So
That's the priority.
yeah, that's the priority. And in fact, when he won this prize just recently, he said to his students at Yale, he's still teaching, he said, don't let anyone distract you from the work at hand, which is economic growth. That's the work at hand, right? So we've got the climate science community, ringing a bell, basically saying we got to slash in the next 11 years almost 50% of our emissions. And Nordhaus is still saying, no, priority is economic growth. So his work was really basically saying, look, we could discount future impacts because what we need to do is prioritize economic growth today.
And what's amazing is that they treat money as if it's more important than things like food, right? I remember this is sort of an infamous quote from Nordhaus. He wrote this in 1991 in a science article. He said, quote, agriculture, the part of the economy that is sensitive to climate change, accounts for just 3% of national output. That means that there is no way to get a very large effect on the U.S. economy.
So by that he means a climate effect on the economy.
Yeah, you could crash agriculture, but it's only 3%.
Hey, no worries.
No worries.
You'll just consume more cars, more
Yeah.
video games, more clothing, whatever it is.
Yeah, eat
Don't-
that. Eat that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Better hope your clothes are made out of edibles, huh?
Yeah, I mean that's what. So they become there's a lot of absurdities in economics because they treat dollar for dollar, no matter what you're spending it on, as equal. Almost.
And we've talked about this before. Like energy is not seen as anything and the forms of energy that we use is not seen as any particularly
Right.
important resource, within the economic system. And here you're saying Nordhaus doesn't even think us eating food is that important,
Right,
in the context of the economy.
What
right?
did food ever do for us? I mean, really.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned earlier, Jason, you mentioned an economist named Herman Daly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, here we are. We're kind of vilifying Nordhaus,
Yeah.
and maybe rightfully so. But
Not maybe.
yeah, okay.
Definitely so.
There are economists out there, and Herman Daly is one of them, who do think in terms of systems,
Yeah.
do think of feedback, do put the lessons from the Donella Meadows and others into their analysis of the economy. And I've had some fortune in my career to actually work with Herman a little bit, and the guy's amazing. He's written all kinds of critiques of what he would call growthism, or even uneconomic growth, where the economy is expanding, but we're actually accruing costs faster than we're accruing benefits. Mm-hmm. And you found this essay that he had written around the time the Nordhaus quote came out. He quoted some other economists who have that same issue. And I think the title of that essay was "When Smart People Make Dumb Mistakes." And one of them was this economist from Oxford, a guy named Wilfred Beckerman.
Another little college.
Yeah, by the way, we're
Yeah.
talking about the most esteemed universities in the world, right?
Right. Here's his quote. A few years later, 1995, he said, "Even if net output of agriculture fell by 50% by the end of the next century, this is only a 1.5% cut in GNP."
Yeah, exactly.
So
No big deal.
economic output only goes down a little bit of a percent as agriculture falls 50%. Like, could a loss of 50% of our food supply cause any trouble in the economy?
So I'm really
hard to make.
I'm struggling here for a second, because I almost have to believe that these are made up quotes.
not.
In the sense that if you said this to my 8-year-old son,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, sure.
He would look at you like you're a fucking idiot.
Yes, rightfully so.
So how does this
Hey,
guy
get that guy a Nobel Prize. Yeah.
Okay, well, speaking of Nobel Prizes, the 2005 Nobel laureate in economics named Thomas C. Schelling said the following. In 1997.
The 90s was a bad year
Yeah.
for economists.
Well,
by the way.
he can't. They're just getting a couple years after one
Yeah,
another.
They're getting more and more absurd.
They want to emphasize the fact of this truism. Quote, "If agricultural productivity were drastically reduced by climate change, the cost of living would rise by 1 or 2%, and at a time when per capita income will likely have doubled."
No
it's going to be
problem.
awesome. I'm going to have like $1 billion in the bank, but no food. But man, I'll be rolling around in all that
Exactly.
cash. It'll be so sweet.
But I also, do they not talk to each other? Because on the one hand, you got Beckerman basically saying, look, hey, no big deal if we lost 50% of our food production, right?
Right.
And then this other guy, Schelling, is saying, well, hey, I guess 50% of our food production is only going to increase our cost of living by 1 or 2%.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't even talk to each other.
They're I mean,
They're going to the same meetings.
Yeah, they do go to the same conferences, but they got to have their own flavor of idiocy.
Yeah.
I mean, and I guess the point here to bring this home is that they're just looking at dollars
Yes.
and numbers as all being interchangeable effectively, right? You lose a little here, you gain a little there. Everything is going to be better as long as we just keep focusing pedal to the metal. We're going to grow the economy.
Right.
That's going to outweigh all of these costs, except, hello, we don't have food.
Right. Well, this is the trouble, right? Money becomes the language of economics, and everything in their minds
Can be monetized.
It's got to be all about money.
Well, what's interesting is to think about, okay, this was, I was stumbling upon this and just like floundering and drowning in 2002. And only in the last few years has it seemed like others are starting to publicly question the kind of things I was questioning. So David Hughes, a fellow of Post-Carbon Institute, has been looking into this.
Yeah.
And I know, and so you know more about this, Asher. Maybe you can talk about this, because there was you went to, you helped convene a American Geophysical Union meeting where David was at. Why don't you talk about some of his stats?
The first thing that I would say about that is that I think the key thing here is maybe the word publicly in what you said.
Yeah.
I do think that there are other people who have had the same experience that you had, Jason, right? And that is, and I'm going to assume they're a minority. I would say the majority, even people are, and these are people who are dedicating their lives and are deeply concerned about these issues. These are climate scientists who've been working on climate systems, and they're very bright people and looking at very complex dynamics within these systems. I think most of them are probably going to just take at face value, the economists are giving us these numbers, we got to work with them, basically, right? But I do think that there are other people who've been sort of like scratching their head about
like Kevin Anderson, for example.
Yeah, Kevin Anderson is a climate scientist, and he's basically, you were saying there's been more public talk about this stuff. I think until recently, I think there's been a lot of private conversations. I'm not a climate scientist. I'm not in the room necessarily for all those conversations, but I certainly, in my work, have come across and spoken with folks who also feel like, wait, there's this disconnect happening here in two ways. One is there's something lacking here in terms of the feedback dynamics, right? Like, how do they assume that everything is going to be rosy over here in the economy? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
When the physical planet that we're depending upon is falling apart, right? That's one thing.
Yeah, no food, but plenty of shopping.
Yeah, and the other is like, thinking about the fact that if we keep growing our material throughput and consuming more energy, we're basically going to put ourselves on a path where we can't even exist on this planet anymore. So they're wrestling with this, I think the difference is that there hasn't been a lot of public conversation about it because people are scared to
reputational risk. Yeah.
They're worried about their reputation, or they defer to people they think must know better. Right.
That's what I was scared of. I was 30 in my early 30s. I'm a young scientist. I'm going, I can't question this. I'm gonna get in trouble. I'll never get a job.
Well, and look at you now. It's horrible.
I just married well.
Let this be a
pariah.
cautionary tale for all who question economic growth.
So getting back to David Hughes, I mean, we've had a lot of these conversations sort of internally about these models. Trying to understand kind of the IPCC models, the RCPs, the representative concentration pathways, and I talked to David Hughes, who's one of our go-to guys, about looking at the larger energy system and what are the assumptions that are built into these models,
right.
And he did some work for us, and we ended up putting together actually a panel presentation at the American Geophysical Union in 2015. And for those who don't know, that's like this geeky, wonky, big event. 15,000 people
huge.
Show up, in San Francisco. Lots of talks.
It's a premier discussion conference for climate change.
Right. And our conversations, a lot of them have been around the fact that there are a lot of assumptions built into these models about how much fossil fuels are even available to burn. And a lot of our work at PCI has been to help people understand fossil fuels are a depleting, non-renewable resource where we pick the low-hanging fruit, and when we pick that low-hanging fruit, it gets harder and harder, and the return on the investment is poorer and poorer, right? So can we really assume that we're going to be burning this much coal, this much natural gas, this much oil, even if we didn't take seriously the the need to
pedal to the metal
to mitigate for climate purposes? And so you did some work. We had this kind of presentation on this, and it's really astonishing because when you look at the RCPs, and it's not just the ones like the 8.5, which is the highest, right?
Even
That's like
lower,
an Armageddon scenario,
right.
You go down 6.
Not the Bruce Willis movie.
No,
Ben
not that
Affleck.
one.
It's all the coal you can imagine.
Even the 2.6, right?
The lowest.
The lowest one they have, has assumptions built in about energy demand growth and economic growth. So believe it or not, actually, of those models, the RCP 2.6 had the highest estimate or projection of what the economy would be like compared in 2100 compared to 2000, right? Mm-hmm. 7 times bigger.
Yeah.
An economy 7 times bigger.
Yeah.
Okay. But mitigated somewhat warming, right? And so there are all these assumptions built into that system, into that model, basically saying we're going to have a shit ton of nuclear power. So there are these assumptions about availability of uranium
right.
and renewable energy and these other things.
And
right?
carbon capture and sequestration.
Tons of things around negative emissions
that haven't been invented.
We
or
have another
tested
show
or-
on that. We'll get into that.
Well,
another show.
but does this mean that I can have a 7,000 square foot house? Is that what we're
Easily.
talking about?
Yeah.
Maybe
Do you have-
14,000?
Do you have a 1,000 square foot house
Yeah,
now?
roughly. Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone's 7 times more. Okay.
It's going to be great.
And energy demand growth in all of these models, was 2.5 to 3.5 times bigger, right? So in 2100, we are consuming a lot more energy, and our economy is way bigger than it currently is.
Yep.
And that's even under these scenarios where we've sort of mitigated somewhat.
Yeah.
I get why economists put those models in. Like, they're afraid of the consequences of what happens if the economy stops growing, which, with the policies and the way we've got it set up now, you have a lot of problems, unemployment, and it can destabilize society. And they're very stuck in that paradigm. You've got to keep growing or everything goes to hell. That's basically their issue. And when I was thinking about that, I came up with this kind of goofy analogy, but let me share it with you. See what you think. So let's say you go to a party, right? And you are...
Which I do all the time.
Yeah.
And maybe beer and wine are being served there.
Love it.
Okay, so you take a drink and you start to feel that little buzz and you're feeling pretty good. And you take another drink and now suddenly you're opened up, you're conversing wildly, you're the life of the party, whatever.
Speaking French.
Yeah, exactly. You,
Why?
at least in your own mind, you're
Very fluent.
Yeah.
so
All you're saying is oui all the time.
Incroyable.
So the idea here is that feels good and you want to keep that going. But if you keep drinking more and more, it can be some problems. So maybe
I just fall asleep.
Maybe the thing to do is try some other drugs or try something else to keep
Uppers.
the buzz going. Yeah, amphetamines or whatever it takes. You just keep putting substances in your body to keep the buzz going.
Good idea.
It's going to cause some consequences. And so I feel like the Economist is just looking for more ways to take alcohol or drugs to keep your buzz when you could just kind of go, why don't we stop drinking for a bit and try something else? Like, I don't know, exercising. That can give you a pretty good buzz or playing some music with your friends or something like that. There's like this incredible unwillingness to
It's
try
myopic.
anything
It's
else.
completely myopic. That's an okay analogy, actually. I think it's okay. I think you did all right.
Thanks.
Yeah. There's no creativity. What you're saying is like, it's all just more, juicing it, drugging it, keeping it going. And there's no path, there's no scenario that says, hey, why don't we keep people fed, keep people clothed, keep like society stable somehow politically, keep the climate reasonably stable, etc., and live. And there's no economists that are thinking in those terms. They're just thinking growth is the path. Like just drinking more, now uppers. And
I mean, the Herman Daly's of the world, the ecological economists, have proposed that we make a transition to a steady state economy that's a stable economy at a size that we can manage.
Yeah, so there's some economists, they're rare, the ecological
you don't
economists.
get that stuff in any economics program in any college.
what percentage of economists are schooled in ecological
It's
economics?
negative.
Yeah. It's a steady state of zero.
But that's what I want. I want the creative thinking of economists to turn towards how do we use less? How do we hold this together? Get rid of the idea of growth and figure out how to hold the system together without breaking. And that takes thinking outside the box and stop just guzzling booze, right?
But this is where, back to my Facebook post about how they're the most dangerous profession and why I get so mad about economics and economists in particular is that we could laugh about the myopic thinking, but the hubris to me, this lack of interest in being inquisitive,
Right.
and asking questions and testing assumptions, there's a lot of tweaking that's happening within this abstract system of these sort of economic models and these
Disconnected from
equations
reality.
that they come up with, where they see the natural world and the impacts of these things as just totally abstract. They're just numbers, right?
Yeah.
And these are human beings, but in their profession, they're not acting like human beings. And it's really dangerous because they are the cheerleaders. They are the priests and priestesses of a vision, of an ideology, of a kind of a belief, an inherent belief system that we've all adopted. Our politicians are 100% behind because it can't not be.
But both left and right,
absolutely.
by the way.
Yeah.
That is basically taking us over the cliff. Just absolute destruction. And we have this other issue, which is my heart is much more aligned, I think, with ecologists and climate scientists and these folks. But I think that they also have to be pushed to not take at face value the numbers that they're being handed, to put into their models and just say these economists, they must know what they're doing.
Well, yeah, it's starting to happen. So like you got like Justin Ritchie came out with a paper looking at this and said there's way too much coal in these models. There was a paper out in Nature last year that was trying to project a low demand scenario for energy. It's starting to happen.
Well, that brings to mind the Green New Deal. And what's amazing about the Green New Deal, if you read the actual resolution, it comes out and it says all of these things that are going to happen if we keep emitting as much greenhouse gases as we're doing. It's very scientifically based.
Yeah.
But then it also points out we have all these other economic problems, equity problems, and it wants to fix everything at once. And it calls for unprecedented levels of prosperity and economic security. And it's going to get that by creating millions of jobs in the renewable energy sector and whatever else is affiliated with that. And the thing that comes up for me is that it's noble, and I think we should be supporting this. It's important, but we also have to be realistic about what's possible economically.
Yeah, this is a tough spot to be in because it's really hard politically to say, hey, we're going to wean ourselves off fossil fuels, and that probably means we're going to have less energy available society, which means there's going to be maybe less material wealth. I think it's important to talk about economic security. I just worry this prosperity notion also has, is tied into assumptions of growth.
Yeah.
And if you can't keep growing the economy on renewables and that doesn't work, then there's a worry about the disappointment. They'll be looked at as a failure.
Right.
And so
then we're right back to Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump and policies of continuous growth and mourning in America, right?
Well, that's the thing. It calls for net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, which is absolutely needed.
The Green New Deal does.
The Green New Deal does. So it's kind of a conundrum. So I feel that it's really important, though, if we're going to go through a big transition like this, which will be disruptive to the economy, that you need to make sure the basics are covered, that there is equity, that people have some economic security. But I just also think maybe you need to be more open about the challenges and realistic about them.
Right. So there's a role for supporting the Green New Deal, but maybe tempering that a little bit with some added reality, realism. We've talked about in the sort of the crazy town sense that when you know what's happening environmentally and socially and you go talk to your friends and your family, they'll think of you as crazy, and it's hard to do. And Jason, you've said, well, you got to take that slow. You don't want to ruin your personal relationships with people, but I think you do want to ruin your relationships with economists.
I think I already have.
If you have any connection, you're in college, you know somebody in this profession, go ahead and ask them. Flood their inboxes. How can we have infinite growth on a finite planet? Why are we pushing this when we know that we're headed for a climate Armageddon with it? Ask them in print. Make comments on their comments. Just find out. Can we have an economic framework that avoids killing the planet?
I think you're absolutely right in the sense that, and I wouldn't even say push the economists in your life, or the ones that are in public life that you come across. It's anyone who takes at face value what the field of economics, a conventional field, neoliberal economics, which is sort of the dominant worldview that we live in right now, at face value. So ask your politicians.
Yeah.
Why are you listening to these economists?
Well, you can take this back to my story, the Three Musketeers, and the back to the cul-de-sac where we were playing. It's like the people in charge are actually giving Nobel Prizes to these guys. So rather than shunning them, which they need to be shunned and moved in a different direction, they're being rewarded. And so I think it has to start, as you're saying, from people calling them out.
Yeah,
until they understand that.
Like Jason Hinkle took down Nordhaus. That was a great article.
Yeah, Jason Hinkle is an economist in the UK, and his when the Nobel Prize came out, he was like, "This is absolutely insane."
Yeah, so I would say people that are knowledgeable within these fields speak up.
Yeah,
The rest of us think critically, ask questions, and ultimately, and I'm serious about this. I'm going to sound like an asshole, but. You used to be cool, right, to smoke cigarettes, and now it's a little bit like, you kind of are a bit of a pariah, right? So I'm not saying anyone ever walked around like, I want to be an economist. Economists are cool, but highly respected, highly rewarded, right?
Yeah.
They should be fucking vilified.
Well, I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to think like an economist and go out and have 17 drinks right now. I think that's what I'm going to do. And then figure out how to have 17 more right after that.
I'm going to start cutting back my food consumption by half, and I'll spend money elsewhere and see how that works.
Yeah, I mean, that'll only dip, 4% or something.
Yeah, you'll be fine.
I'll be fine.
That's our show. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the podcast, and while you're at it, rate or review it at iTunes. That really helps get it in front of more people. To learn more, visit postcarbon.org/crazytown. And if you want to actually learn something instead of listening to us bozos, you should check out Postcarbon Institute's Think Resilience course. It's 4 hours, $20, and will seriously change the way you see the world. Catch you next time on the mean streets of Crazytown.
Hey, I'm a plant biologist, which makes me really excited to introduce a sponsor for today's show, the Photosynthesis Exchange.
What are those guys?
Well, they're based at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and what they're doing is they're setting up a market for oxygen.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So we've got a carbon market now, right? Like cap and trade in California. So they're doing something like that for oxygen.
Well, that's the waste product. The oxygen is what you all need to breathe. Right.
Okay. You don't though.
Yeah. No, I need it too. I mean, I'm going to pay as well. We're all going to pay.
Well, okay. but how do we profit off this? That's what I want to know. Can I invest?
Well, the traders profit. For each time you breathe, each gram of oxygen you use, there's of course a fee.
So there's a transaction fee.
There's a transaction fee,
which is basically each breath we take.
Every breath you take,
somebody makes some money.
You make.
I gotta quit exercising. That's upping the respiration rate.
Just meditate.
Well, that's why Donald Trump doesn't exercise. He said you have a finite amount of energy in your body and finite amount of oxygen you could breathe without having to pay out the nose, right?
Well, this is really important. This is gonna. We gotta tie this to the economy or economic growth. Everything has got to be monetized nowadays.
Agreed.
Okay.
But I'm going to work on my meditation and slowing down my breathing because I can't really afford this.
Oh.